Breaking news, Niger has signed a nuclear program deal with Russia, and now France is furious. They are now suing Niger.
What happens when the country that powered France's nuclear empire for decades suddenly decides it wants nuclear power for itself? That's the shock coming out of Niger, where Russia has stepped in with a proposal to build the nation's first nuclear plant, something Paris never offered in over 50 years of mining Niger's uranium. So why did France keep Niger in the dark while taking its light? Let's find that out. The news broke like a thunderclap across Africa. Russia has proposed to build Niger's first nuclear power plant. For a nation that has been exporting uranium for half a century while importing electricity to power its homes, the symbolism was staggering. It wasn't just a diplomatic handshake or a mining contract. It was the announcement of a future that Niger was never supposed to have. The deal was unveiled in Niamey under a cooperation agreement between Niger's junta and Russia's state nuclear giant, Rosatom. On paper, it includes technical assistance, medical research, training programs, and the tantalizing idea of generating electricity from Niger's own uranium. If built, this would not only be Niger's first nuclear power plant, but the first such project in all of West Africa. A region long dismissed as a supplier of raw resources is suddenly imagining a leap into one of the most advanced technologies on Earth. The shock was immediate in Western capitals. For decades, Niger's uranium was treated as France's lifeline, a steady supply that fed its reactors and guaranteed its energy independence. But just weeks before Russia's offer, the junta in Niamey made a bold and risky move. It nationalized the operations of Orano, France's nuclear company, stripping it of rights it had held since the 1970s. Overnight, France lost control of a resource it had long considered untouchable. Now, with Russia moving in to fill the vacuum, Paris has been forced to watch as its old colonial backyard slips away. For Nigerians, however, the announcement was greeted with something different: hope. Crowds in Niamey waved both Russian and Nigerian flags, cheering a partnership that promised more than just extraction. It offered transformation. For too long, uranium had been a curse, a glowing treasure that lit French cities while leaving Niger itself in darkness. Now, Russia's pledge, however uncertain its timeline, suggested that Niger might finally use its uranium for its own progress. Skeptics point out that nuclear plants are expensive, complex, and vulnerable in unstable regions. They highlight the insurgencies that continue to threaten Western Niger and argue that a project of this scale may remain on paper forever. But in truth, whether or not the plant is built is almost secondary. The announcement itself has already shifted the balance of power. It has been shown that Niger has options beyond France, that it can dictate new terms, and that it can aspire to more than being a quarry for Europe. This is why Moscow's move feels so calculated. Russia understands the hunger for dignity in the Sahel. It knows that offering Niger the idea of nuclear energy, no matter how distant, is more powerful than another promise to buy yellow cake. In the great chessboard of geopolitics, Moscow has made a move that resonates deeply with Nigerians who feel robbed by history, and the timing could not have been sharper. Niger's junta came to power in 2023 amid sanctions, diplomatic isolation, and threats of regional intervention. By offering nuclear cooperation, Russia has given the junta something it desperately needed: legitimacy in the eyes of its people. It is no longer just a government holding power. It is now a regime promising a leap into the future. But here lies the real question: how did Niger end up in this position to begin with? Why did a nation so rich in uranium never benefit from its own treasure? To understand the shock of Russia's nuclear offer, we must look back at the half-century when France dug Niger's deserts, lit up its own cities, and left Nigerians in the dark. For more than 5 decades, France built its nuclear empire on Nigerian soil, but never once invited Niger to share in the light. The tale begins in the 1970s, when French company Areva, later renamed Orano, took control of Niger's uranium fields in Arlit and later Imuraren. For Paris, this was no ordinary mining project. It was survival. France, unlike most nations, depends heavily on nuclear power. Today, nearly 70% of its electricity comes from reactors. Niger became the quiet engine of this strategy, a land whose deserts glowed invisibly in the wires of French cities. Yet what did Niger gain? Almost nothing. The uranium ore was dug up, converted into yellow cake, and shipped abroad to France's refineries in Normandy. From there, it was transformed into fuel rods that powered French homes, industries, and research. In Niamey, however, the lights still flickered. Electricity imports from Nigeria filled the gap, while coal stations coughed out a limited supply. The injustice was glaring. A nation that fueled France's nuclear age was left behind in the dark. For Nigerians, this became a bitter symbol of dependency. Orano's gleaming offices in Paris contrasted sharply with the dust and poverty of Arlot's mining towns, where workers labored in radioactive dust with little protection. When French leaders spoke of their energy independence, few cared to mention that it rested on a foreign colony's dependence. Even when uranium prices boomed, Niger saw little change in its fortunes. Most profits flowed out, leaving behind only environmental scars and communities still struggling with poverty. France had every opportunity to do differently. It could have invested in Niger's energy sector, funded reactors or even small research facilities, or trained a generation of Nigerian nuclear scientists. Instead, the colonial logic prevailed. Niger was good enough to supply, never good enough to transform. By the time the 21st century arrived, the pattern was deeply entrenched. Even after Orano rebranded and promised partnership, the reality stayed the same. Paris consumed, Niamey waited. The anger grew quietly but steadily. When Nigerian officials asked why their country could not industrialize its own uranium, they were met with excuses about security risks, high costs, and technical capacity. But these explanations rang hollow. Other resource nations, from Kazakhstan to Canada, had managed to climb the ladder of nuclear expertise. Why not Niger? The truth was clear. A dependent Niger served French interests better than an independent one. This is why the nationalization of Orano's operations in June was not a sudden act of hostility, but the eruption of decades of pent-up frustration. The junta understood what ordinary Nigerians had long felt. Their country's uranium had been stolen in plain sight. France's talk of partnership masked a system where one side got the light and the other stayed in the shadows. But if France never allowed Niger to share in its nuclear knowledge, then who would? If Paris left the nation in the dark, who would dare offer it electricity from its own uranium? That question opened the door to a new player, and it is here that Russia saw its chance. Let's pause for a second to say big thank you to the Black Culture Diary community, where Black voices, stories, and legacies are preserved and amplified. By becoming a member, you're not just supporting the channel, you're becoming part of a powerful cultural movement. Let's continue. When Niger finally slammed the door on France, it did not take long for another power to knock. Russia, sensing the void, stepped forward with a message that Nigerians had never heard before. Not just extraction, but transformation. In the delicate balance of global energy politics, this was more than an economic offer. It was a statement that Moscow understood the hunger for dignity that Paris had long ignored. The timing was no accident. Since the 2023 coup that ousted Mohamed Bazoum, Niger has been searching for new allies. Sanctions from the West African bloc, ECOWAS, left the country economically strained and politically isolated. Western governments painted the junta as illegitimate, while Paris fumed at the nationalization of its uranium crown jewel. Into this storm stepped Moscow, offering not condemnation but cooperation. In late July, Russia's energy minister Sergei Tsivilev visited Niamey and declared, "Our task is not simply to participate in uranium mining. We must create an entire system for the development of peaceful atomic energy in Niger." Those words carried more than a technical meaning. They were a promise of partnership. For Niger, this marked an entirely new dynamic. The French had always spoken the language of supply chains, mines, contracts, shipments, and quotas. The Russians spoke the language of empowerment, nuclear research, local expertise, and long-term energy independence. The difference was psychological as much as material. France had always treated Niger as a junior. Russia was presenting itself as an equal partner. Strategically, of course, Russia has its own calculations. Gaining a foothold in Imararan, one of the world's largest untapped uranium deposits, would strengthen its already significant position in the global uranium market. It would also strike directly at Europe's energy security, tightening Moscow's leverage at a time when Europe is already scrambling to cut its dependence on Russian gas. By aligning with Niger, Russia doesn't just gain uranium, it gains geopolitical influence across the entire Sahel. Yet what makes this move resonate so powerfully is not Moscow's advantage, but Niger's awakening. The idea of a nuclear plant, even if years away, has electrified the national imagination. For decades, Nigerians had been told they could never reach that level of development, that their role was to dig and export. Now, suddenly, the conversation is different. Not about what Niger can supply to others, but about what it can build for itself. Whether the project materializes or not, the shift in perception is irreversible. Moscow also plays another card Paris never did: respect for Niger's political mood. Russian flags have become common at rallies in Niamey, waved alongside Niger's own colors as symbols of defiance against the old colonial order. By speaking directly to Nigerians' resentment of France, Russia has embedded itself not just in the minds, but in the national psyche. Where France demanded loyalty, Russia offered recognition. Where Paris dismissed Niger's ambitions, Moscow encouraged them. Still, questions remain. Nuclear plants require massive capital, stable grids, and long-term planning. The Sahel is plagued by insecurity, and Niger's economy is fragile. Can such a project truly be built in a region where militants roam and infrastructure is thin? These concerns are real, but they may also miss the bigger picture. For Nigerians, the significance is not whether the plant opens in 5 years or 15, it is that someone finally dared to imagine it with them. This is the heart of Russia's gambit. The Kremlin understands that winning Africa is not just about trade deals, it is about offering dignity where the West offered dependency. By promising Niger a nuclear future, Russia has positioned itself as more than a mining partner. It has cast itself as the nation's ally in self-determination. But Niger is not alone in this awakening. From Bamako to Ouagadougou, other Sahel nations are also pushing back against decades of resource plunder. If Niger is turning uranium into a weapon of sovereignty, what are its neighbors doing with their own treasures? Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. Niger's uranium gamble does not stand in isolation. It is part of a wider tremor shaking the entire Sahel, where governments are tearing down the old rules of resource extraction and rewriting the script of who gets to benefit. What Russia has tapped into in Niger is the same fire that burns in Mali and Burkina Faso, a determination to stop being the quarry of the world and start becoming the architects of their own wealth. Look at Burkina Faso. Under Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the country has forced international gold miners to share far more of their profits and, crucially, to refine part of their production locally. For the first time, gold is being transformed within the country, instead of being shipped raw to foreign refineries. This change means jobs at home, taxes collected locally, and a sense that Burkina Faso is no longer surrendering its riches for pennies on the dollar. The state has even begun constructing its first gold refinery to capture the value that used to vanish overseas. The message is simple. If you want Burkina Faso's gold, you will also invest in Burkina Faso's future. Mali has gone further still. In its drive for resource sovereignty, it detained executives of Barrick Gold, a Canadian mining giant, in a dispute over revenue. To Western boardrooms, this seemed shocking. To ordinary Malians, it was justice long overdue. For decades, foreign companies extracted wealth while local communities stayed poor. Now the government insists on new laws that demand greater stakes for local businesses and more direct benefits for the state. The days when multinationals dictated terms without challenge are ending. This Sahelian assertiveness is not only about economics, it is about pride and survival. After years of military coups, sanctions, and security crises, these governments need legitimacy. They have found it not in empty slogans, but in policies that strike at the heart of colonial legacies. By reclaiming resources, they send a message to their people. We may not control every battlefront, but we will control our wealth. The reaction on the streets has been telling. Demonstrations across Niamey, Bamako, and Ouagadougou are no longer just protests against France. They are celebrations of sovereignty. Flags of Russia and Burkina Faso are waved not out of blind allegiance but as symbols of a new alliance, one in which African nations seek partners who respect their ambitions rather than strip them of their treasures. In this climate, the nuclear proposal in Niger is not just a technical offer, it is a political anthem that harmonizes with the demands echoing across the region. Western critics dismiss these moves as short-term populism. They point to falling foreign investment, tighter sanctions, and increased risks for international firms. Yet they overlook the fact that for decades, investment meant exploitation and stability meant stagnation. Africans are asking, stability for whom? Prosperity for whom? If stability only preserves dependency, then instability may be the price of liberation. This is why Niger's nuclear announcement resonates far beyond its borders. It is not simply about uranium or reactors. It is part of a continental awakening. In the same way Mali reimagines its gold and Burkina Faso its refining, Niger is daring to reimagine its uranium. Each country's choice feeds into a shared vision, that Africa's natural resources must serve Africans first. But this raises the ultimate question. It is one thing to demand sovereignty, and quite another to build industries that turn resources into prosperity. Can Niger and its Sahelian neighbors truly move from protest to production, from defiance to development? To the outside world, skeptics argue the project is too ambitious for a country grappling with insurgency, sanctions, and fragile infrastructure. Yet for Africans watching closely, the proposal carries a symbolism far deeper than engineering blueprints or feasibility studies. It represents the possibility of finally leaping from quarry to laboratory, from supplier of raw ores to producer of advanced technology. Niger's story illustrates a broader truth. Africa has always been told what it cannot do. It cannot refine its own gold. It cannot manufacture its own cars. It cannot process its own oil. Uranium, perhaps the most sensitive of resources, has been at the very top of this list. France's refusal to share nuclear expertise with Niger was not just about economics, it was about preserving a hierarchy where Europe remained the master of technology and Africa remained the servant of supply. Russia's offer, even if entangled with its own strategic interests, broke that psychological ceiling. For the first time, an African uranium nation is being told it could light up its own cities with its own resources. The implications ripple across the continent. If Niger can aspire to nuclear power, why can't Ghana or Tanzania, both with uranium deposits of their own? If the Sahel can demand refineries for gold, why can't the Congo demand battery factories for its cobalt? The nuclear plant may still be a distant dream, but the precedent has been set. Africans have the right to demand more than raw trade. They have the right to demand transformation. This is where the stakes become geopolitical. A Niger that runs on its own uranium changes more than its energy balance. It challenges the very foundations of global dependency. For decades, Africa's resources flowed outward, enriching others while leaving the continent trapped in poverty. If Niger builds the first nuclear reactor in West Africa, it will not only generate electricity, it will ignite an idea that resources can power African industry, African science, and African futures. That idea is more dangerous to the old order than any reactor core. The skeptics, of course, raise valid concerns. Nuclear plants are vulnerable to sabotage in unstable regions. They require billions of dollars in upfront investment and long-term grids capable of carrying the power. Niger, one of the world's poorest nations, may not yet have the industrial base to sustain such a project. But these obstacles are not new. They were said of South Korea in the 1960s, of China in the 1980s, and of India when it first pursued nuclear energy. Each time, the same doubts were voiced, and each time, the determination of nations to break dependency carried them forward. The question is whether Niger and Africa are ready to show that same determination. Already, the nuclear conversation has reshaped Niger's identity. No longer just a footnote in France's energy story, Niger is being spoken of as a potential pioneer in West Africa. This shift matters. It inspires citizens, emboldens leaders, and forces international actors to reconsider how they engage with Africa. If yesterday's Niger was a silent supplier, tomorrow's Niger could be a model for resource sovereignty. The deeper lesson is this: Even if the reactor takes decades to materialize, the political power of the idea is immediate. Africa no longer accepts the old limits set by colonial masters. Whether through nuclear power, gold refineries, or battery production, the continent is beginning to demand that its resources serve its own people first. And so we return to the question we began with. What happens when the country that lit France's nuclear empire decides it wants nuclear power for itself? The answer is unfolding before our eyes. A shift not just in energy policy, but in history. Niger's nuclear dream is not simply about uranium. It is about Africa daring to imagine itself as more than a supplier. It is about a continent stepping out of the shadows and into its own light. Do you think Niger will actually succeed in building Africa's first nuclear power plant? Let us know in the comments section. Has France permanently lost its grip on Niger's uranium, or could it claw its way back? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.